Before I turn the meeting over to Ann, I'd just like to say that Ann is currently the vice chair of ADST and will happily replace me at the end of the year as chair. I would also like to tell everyone that I knew Toria when she was a second tour junior officer in Moscow. And if someone would have said to me she would end up as Undersecretary for Political Affairs, I would have said, of course. So what else is new? Ann?
So thanks, Harry, and it's my pleasure to welcome Undersecretary Toria Nuland to this annual meeting of the Association of Diplomatic Studies and Training. Undersecretary Nuland is well known to this audience from her time as Assistant Secretary in EUR, as Ambassador to NATO, and as spokesperson for the department. Toria is particularly welcome and appropriate as the speaker for this meeting because ADST is essentially a research organization that preserves a historical record of American diplomacy through its oral histories, and in doing so, preserves and augments the history of our country. Toria and her husband come from among the most well-known academic families in the country, and during her years as a private citizen, she was a distinguished practitioner in Yale's famous Grand Strategy course and a board member of the National Endowment for Democracy. Toria has agreed to make a few remarks to the group and then answer some questions which have been submitted to us.
Well, first of all, it's a delight to be with you and with mentors like Harry and Ann, who, as Harry made clear, raised me up and without whom I would not have the honor of being able to come back to this spectacular department at this crucial time for us. I don't want to speak too long. I would rather go to the questions that you all have, but I just want to thank you for all you do at ADST to capture and preserve and share the experience of America's diplomats and to give them to the next generation. I think we have a lot more of that we can do. And I hope to work with you over the period of this tour to think about things like a standard course that we could offer on American diplomacy to universities, et cetera. So let's talk about that. I just wanted to, you all have been following what the Secretary is trying to do in his modernization initiative. I will not slavishly go through all of those things again, except to say that we are trying to do things on sort of four baskets. One, ensure that this department is addressing the new transnational issues that are consuming so that we have the expertise that we need on climate, on global health, on cyber. And as you know, this department is superbly able and capable of adapting to the times, and that's part of the story that you tell. But we need to ensure that our generalists are literate in these subjects and that we bring in experts as we need to. So that is one basket of issues. The next basket of issues is a workforce that truly represents America and that is truly empowered and from whom we get our best ideas and from whom the conventional wisdom is challenged and who we support when they're willing to be creative and take risks. So that goes to everything in what we're trying to do in broadening and opening up a policy channel, a dissent channel, working on diversity where we're really hearing from officers at a much younger age what the concerns are and what drives them out of the service and how we can mentor them and better support them going forward, and how we can get our creativity and energy back, how we can have a workforce who is supported when they are bold rather than when they are risk averse within the constraints of keeping everybody safe, obviously. And then the last piece is just taking advantage of technology and new ways of work to do things better, easier, faster, in a more family-friendly way. So working on how we can preserve some of the benefits of the flexibilities that the weird COVID period gave us in terms of telework, but ensuring that we do so in a way that also allows us to work in a classified way, collaborate with each other, be safe when we're on the road, but also active diplomats. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on. I think, frankly, we've got a lot more to do in terms of desludgifying the foreign service career. Promotions are taking too long. I feel like the cone system is strangling us in a way that it shouldn't. We need officers to develop across cones earlier. And I think that we've also got to really dig in and reward creative officers in a way that we haven't always done. So those are things we want to work on going forward as well. Let me pause there. We can talk policy, we can talk structure, we can talk interagency, any of those things.
Thanks very much, Toria. We did get a lot of questions on reform, but I wanted to start with, not surprisingly because of your presence here today as the service's foremost expert on Russia, we got a lot of questions on Russia and what Putin is up to in Ukraine, which at least to me seems obscure. Could you comment on the situation with Russia right now and what's taking place in Ukraine?
Well, thanks, Anne. You know, the president came into office truly preaching and wanting and reaching out to Putin for a relationship that was, as he puts it, more stable and predictable. And trying at this time of lots of global ferment, lots of competition, authoritarians and Democrats, to work together where we can, to be straight up when we disagree, and to de-escalate where we've had conflicts. And you know, it felt coming out of Geneva like Putin was interested in certain aspects of that, certainly continuing arms control. We had a little bit of a bumpy start on cyber and ransomware, but we've had some de-escalation there. We're working together a little bit better on Syria, although you know it's within a very small set of issues, and then on Iran. This new move on Ukraine has the unfortunate ability to upset any apple cart for stability and predictability that we wanted to build here. We are now looking at, as the secretary's been saying publicly over the last couple of days, close to 100,000 Russian forces ringing three sides of Ukraine, much more sophisticated equipment, and the capability, frankly, to be in Kyiv if they so chose within a matter of days, not months. Why is Putin doing this now? You know, and has Putin made, first of all, let me just say that we don't believe that he's made a strategic decision to move, but he's certainly setting the predicate, and he's doing it in a way that is already vibrating Ukraine and destabilizing our allies on NATO's Eastern Front. So, you know, is this to create options? Is it because he, having sat in his little spider bunker during COVID for a year and a half, has regretted losing aspects of the Soviet Union and thinks this is his moment to reclaim them? Does he think we're weak after Afghanistan? Does he think, you know, French going into elections, Germans changing government, he finally gets rid of Madame Merkel, that this is his time? He certainly is no fan of Ukrainian President Zelensky, and would like to, you know, have a more compliant leadership in Kyiv. So what can one do? One, you know, the president first sent Bill Burns, as you saw, to make the to say to Putin, we see what you're doing, and don't expect that this will be cost-free for Russia. Basically to say privately what the secretary is now saying publicly, in the hopes that Putin would de-escalate. He hasn't. So now we are in a much more public phase, not only calling out what we see, but also rallying, as the secretary called it today, the European transatlantic response, the crushing kind of an economic set of sanctions that would really raise the cost for Russia, building that package and putting it in the window. So not only Putin can see what will happen if he makes this move, but those around him who benefit from the international economic system will see it and may be able to influence him. And then continuing to harden Ukraine. Obviously, if Russia chose to run over them, they could do it. They could do it very quickly, but it would then be a bloody civil war for a very, very long time. So what we're trying to do is make Ukraine a porcupine. I don't see us, fighting their war with them, but to make them far more porcupine-ish and to ensure that this will not be cost-free for Putin. Will we deter him? I sure hope so, but we are back into a situation that you remember well, but with much bigger ambitions and potentially higher stakes for everything that we are trying to do in terms of not just peace and stability in Europe, but how the other authoritarians look at our resolve to protect fragile democracies. And you could argue that Xi will watch what happens vis-a-vis for his ambitions in Taiwan and other things. So big doings.
Thanks very much, Tori. That was extremely useful. We also had a number of questions on Afghanistan. And I think this goes to the dilemma the administration faces, which is how to confront what appears to be a looming humanitarian disaster and not the Taliban. And how do you see the administration working through these issues? Because it's obviously critically important. I'm paraphrasing the questions now, to get humanitarian relief in there, but not aid the Taliban in whatever they're doing. Would you address that? Could you talk about that for a moment?
Absolutely. Well, the Taliban are facing their own version of the Pottery Barn problem, right? You break it, you own it, or you take it, you own it. And I don't think any of them were economic wizards going into this, and they certainly are having to learn very fast on the job that essentially Afghanistan for the past 20 years has been largely supported by the international community. And, unless they are willing to be um, um, appropriate stewards of their country and of international humanitarian law and all the other things, they're not going to gain legitimacy and they're not going to gain that kind of support. So what are we trying to do? We're working on a number of fronts here. A lot of this is still in development and still in discussion with international partners and frankly with the Taliban themselves. But we're working across a bunch of lines. The first one obviously is to continue our own humanitarian support, but to do it not directly to the Taliban, but through UN agencies and directly to NGOs. So to lighten and lift sanctions to allow humanitarian organizations to work directly with their non-Taliban Afghan partners or through the UN. And that's particularly important with regard to food security, education, health, all those kinds of things. So we've sort of broadened the basket of humanitarian and issued some licenses that affect not just us, but also our international partners who otherwise will be worried. So that's one line. The second line of effort is to help the Taliban get some money printed, which they're obviously going to have to do. I'm not going to talk too much about that here, but how do you get some liquidity and Afghanis into the system, which we're working on with various partners, in a way that has to ensure that we don't set off inflation and or sort of dollar black market, that kind of thing. Very difficult. You've done that, Anne, in other places, but we're working on some of that to give some short-term relief. And then the big kahuna is this grand bargain that we are hoping to cut, whereby the World Bank could use an existing facility that it has, perhaps with more support, and I'll come to that. They have close to $1 billion now that they can use to start to pay civil servant salaries in key sectors without it going through the Taliban government. So the deal that we're trying to cut with the Taliban now is that if they are willing to ensure that women can participate in the health sector and in the jobs that they've long held, and where they can do that, we would be willing to allow the World Bank to pay direct salaries. Similarly, where girls can go to school and get a full education, we would be prepared to support teacher salaries, these kinds of things. So we're trying to do creative workarounds. And if that begins to work, it might also provide scope for thinking about some of these frozen assets. That's very and similarly, um, having some of them channeled into that kind of a system, but that's very, very complicated in terms of the entanglements for that money from September 11th families legitimately, and so it would have to go through the courts and all of that. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on, but very much saying to the Taliban, this will be direct support and only in the context of your providing, your meeting international obligations to uphold your responsibilities to your own people.
Yes, thank you. And yes, it's terribly complicated and difficult. And we also had, I wanted to ask you on the question of Foreign Service reform. There were a number of studies and analyses that came out over the past couple of years. And you mentioned a number of priorities of the administration, and the secretary gave a speech not long ago at FSI on the priorities. How would you prioritize those efforts? What's first and what's second, and is it education? I'm not surprisingly being ADST. We got lots of questions on Foreign Service education and training, and could members FSO go to universities for a year? What's your take on the prioritization of reform? What's most necessary?
Um, I would prioritize first and foremost what we call the float and what was called the float in a lot of these studies, which is to increase our personnel numbers such that we have more flex to allow folks not only to go to more training and longer term training, including, higher education opportunities if we can afford it, and do more of what the military does. I never got a master's degree because I came in at 23 and couldn't get either the time or the money to go back to school. So here I am, right? Had to learn on the job. But the float would also enable us to do a number of work-life balance things that are driving folk out. If folk and all of us have had these experiences, you have a spouse who can't go overseas, or you have an aging parent who you need to be home for. You want a different experience. You want to take a year out and see what the world out there looks like before you decide whether you're staying or going. So you have, a partner who can't travel or whatever. So if we had a larger float, and I think we're up to, in the first fiscal, we got 500 more positions, and I think the secretary wants to get to at least 1,000, if not 1,500, which would allow us to do a lot of these things. And personally, I have this idea, which may or may not go, but to try to have a system where for the number of years in, you get a certain amount of credit to be able to take some time off to do other things. And I think it'll help with retention, and particularly for our diverse workforce who, are getting recruited and picked off by business all over the place. And we need to let them go see the world out there and understand that making money is cool, but wearing America's t-shirt is even more cool. So that would be one thing. The second thing is, I am really, really upset. I way off the record will say to this Corps, I would not join this foreign service. I wouldn't join a foreign service where you sit and grade for 9 years. I just don't think it works. And where you're back to the conal stricture, where you don't get the mixed experience coming up. So I think we've got to speed promotions. I think we've got to downgrade jobs. I think we've got to get back to more of the interfunctional promotion opportunity if we don't decone. I think you need O2s even when you're a desk officer lead. You need to know how to do all sides of the relationship, and we need to make this career more exciting and more flexible for folk. And that also goes to what we have to do about bringing younger officers or less senior officers into negotiations, getting them going and being part of the real fun of it, and rewarding their creativity.
And maybe as a final question, Toria, what about the upcoming Summit for Democracies? What are the takeaways there? What are the deliverables? what does the administration expect to achieve um, by this summit?
Well, let me just start with the, is it an adverb? Summit for democracies, not summit of democracies. And the president's intent here is to capture our own learning of the past, 5 years, if not our entire history, that your democracy is never perfect, and we have to have humility about perfecting it. So first and foremost, the idea here is that everybody who's been invited will come not to grade each other's homework, but to grade their own homework. What can I do to strengthen, I as a leader, what am I doing to strengthen my own democracy across all of the lines that we know are important, everything from electoral processes to judiciaries to free press to anti-corruption to all of these kinds of things. So each democracy coming pledging to be stronger a year hence, when we hope to be able to do it in person and not virtually, than they are today. And then some collaboration on some of the things that we know make democracy stronger. When you can use technology to squeeze out corruption, e-systems, these kinds of things, when you can ensure that you have a broader base of candidates at the lower levels in the system, so that you don't end up with kind of a sclerotic junta style democracy, these kinds of things. So how do we collaborate on those kinds of things? But also to talk more among ourselves about the fact that, the autocrats are coming for us because our citizens don't think democracy delivers. And how do you reverse that narrative? How do you talk about what we call diplomacy for the middle class? How do you actually, as we work to build back better and get greener, how do you ensure that working people feel those benefits and it's not elites, and that it is not just raking off the top? So the idea is to strengthen our own community. This first one will be virtual, so it really will be almost more like a kind of a webinar, with the hope that a year from now we will come back, be able to do it in person with all the bells and whistles and NGO community, business community, etc. But it is not meant to be exclusionary. It's meant to be strengthening of the fundamental fibers, each of us working on ourselves and together.
Thank you so much. And I know we're running out of time, and you've been very generous with your time this morning. So I'd first like to thank Harry Geisel for his 7 years of service on the ADST board and his chairmanship, which was invaluable, and turn it over to our president, Susan Johnson, to close out this event.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, Harry. We're all deeply grateful. And Undersecretary Nuland, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know with your busy schedule, and thanks to your staff. And finally, thanks to all of our participants today for being here and for the questions they've contributed. I just can't leave you without saying that we're looking forward very much to recording your oral history, Undersecretary Nuland, when the time is right. So keep that in mind. The time will come around, and we look forward to it. So thanks to everybody. And with that, this event is over. Thank you.
Thanks again.
And thanks to Harry. You're the best.
Fortunately,
Likewise.
he'll stick with us, although not as chair. Continue to
Excellent.
support us the way he has been.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.